Today I have two slides. I'll start with one and then go to a kind of meta idea that I was referring to in the post about a nice mind-blowing idea. It's not that I try to come up with something mind-blowing or not, but just sometimes I potentially do, or come up with a distinction that particularly ties things or really helps me both figure out things I've been doing and what I shouldn't do in the future and get it so it's more clear. And also will help me explain things better to you guys. And that happened for this topic, so that's good. And then a nice structure came as well. Hey, Peter, great to have you here. So, all right, James, fired up, learning Mandarin from my girlfriend. Oh, that's we talked about this several dimensionalities ago. And actually, did you happen to see the podcast I did with Ty Lopez? Are you referring to that, where he asked me about learning languages, and I said I know how to do it, particularly with kids. But the way to do it if you're older, probably be one way would be if a very attractive woman refused to speak to you in anything but that language. Of course, she's not doing that. Great. Good to have you here, Julie. Glad you made it. All right. So let's jump into things. The first slide is just a slide from before, just to remind us of the overall frame here. So with this business system, what we're doing, I don't know if system is the perfect word, but whatever, framework and such. The idea here is that we're properly representing the components of business. And I'm also identifying that there's three and only three components in this way. Of course, you can divide things in different ways, but this way of dividing it is complete. And I mean, of course, you can come up with things like there's what you do before the person buys and there's what you do after, right? Meaning there's lots of different ways you can divide things potentially. But I find this to be a very practical way to divide the aspects and components of business. It's what I use. It's not just like some kind of theory I have. And it is, as I say, complete, which is huge because it means that if you're looking to grow, either start or grow, or just make a business easier as well, like sometimes they get out of control a little bit in some way, or they're unpleasant and you're trying to get it right. If you're looking for bottlenecks, advantages, and so forth, then it helps to say, all right, well, there's three places and only three places to look. And because it sucks to have to feel like you're missing something, right? Or it's tough, it's particularly inconvenient if you're missing something outside of a box, you're not even aware of what it might be. If you feel like you're missing an assumption, which we all are in life, including myself, and I'm always hunting down assumptions I'm missing, but it's nice in business to feel like, all right, everything's got to be in one of these three boxes, right? Like ideally in life or in aspects of life, if we can narrow down our overall frame so that it's correct and secure, and we only have to look inside of it, then that's ideal, right? We don't want to be restricted to a frame or a box that's overly narrow or incorrect. When people say you have to think outside of the box, that's when the box doesn't have the solution. But the nice thing about these three components is that the solution is going to lie inside one of these three boxes in business. So that is very helpful in that way too. The word semi-soft lock appears on the slide, right? So what the slide says, if anyone's listening to the MP3, is that I write, you need one of these for a semi-soft lock and the other two need to be competent. That's one way of looking at it, right? You don't need that top line, but it's an extra benefit if you understand it. And I'll quickly go back over it right now. And then I list the three things. Oh, and so we're both dividing and being complete here, like in terms of the components of business, but we're also looking to represent them in a particularly useful way, right? We have to, in some sense, we think in terms of metaphors and representations in a way that's inescapable, right? There's certain shortcuts that we need because we can't reinvent the wheel in the moment all the time. Ultimately, we can look to get our understanding better and better, but whenever we're actually in the moment acting, which is always, in a sense, you're always getting the results and making the decisions and performing the actions and even having thoughts at the level of your current model, right? Which is based on the level of your current understanding and such. So the more accurate our representations are in the mental model, the better. In other words, the more accurate like our metaphors are or our illustrations, right? Those are all in and of themselves representations of this idea, representations. And so I used to say traffic, conversion, and product. And part of what we're doing in this webinar series is reframing those to even better illustrations with relationships, decision. A lot of these words don't fit very well into a sentence. Like when I have to use the word sales or conversion when I'm just talking, but representing it when you're thinking about business and what to do, or when you're thinking about it, sales, if you think, all right, it's going to come down to decision, right? Relationship needs to be there separately and you represent that separately. So again, it's speech and normal talking. It can be hard to use the word decision. It might not be the right tense or whatever type of word to use. Like if I say you're doing sales, right? You can't say you're doing decision, but still representing that as decision is better overall. It's not about being the word police, but just when you're thinking about it. And I expanded upon it and I'm going to tie things together today and give some additional information. And then thinking in terms of fulfillment, which allows us to combine a product and service towards a result in our mind. When we think product, then it's hard, that representation kind of excludes service in a certain way, especially if it naturally looks like a product, right? Or if it looks like a service, then we think, oh, product or service. But instead, we're thinking now in terms of product plus service, and then also that are forming a result. And all of that is when we have the representation of fulfillment, then it allows us to fit all those words and concepts in without accidentally restricting ourselves out of them, having representation that naturally excludes those. A semi-soft lock, right? A hard lock is when you've got something locked up. If you have a deal locked up, if basically Armageddon would have to happen, metaphorically speaking, some major unforeseen disaster would have to happen, or else you're definitely going to get the result you want. That's a hard lock. You have it all sewn up. A soft lock is if you have like when it comes to a contract. I'm using that as an example. This applies to like anything you're trying to accomplish. But a soft lock with an agreement, for example, would be something like where you have verbal agreement with someone that generally that's what it means. Their word means something with them. They're not just flaky. Then you're generally going to succeed as long as things play out without something particularly going wrong. That's very unlikely. It's not the same thing as like a crazy Armageddon scenario, but it's just extraordinarily unlikely. There would need to be maybe a series of kind of shocking, surprisingly unlucky events, right? The person, whatever. So a and there's no exact dividing line between a hard lock and a soft lock, but there's a little bit of a continuum. But then a semi-soft lock is a terminology that I invented back when I was doing Magic professionally, that card game. And what it refers to is something that's a lot easier to achieve. The problem with going for even a soft lock is that if that's what you're currently feel like you're trying to accomplish, it's often too much. Strategically, it's a hard thing. It's harder to achieve, right? And it's harder to that representation of things where you're going for this kind of lock. You're trying to win all in one fell swoop in a sense. Put yourself in an overwhelming position to win, right? Which is like what a soft lock is. Then strategically, makes you overlook an option that's much more reliable, and that is when you have the representation and mental illustration, the model for a semi-soft lock in your mind, then what you're looking for is something different. You're looking for something that you can achieve that ends up being very likely for you to achieve if you focus in on it and you're willing to invest a reasonable amount of resources into it. So you go within reason, all in on just achieving something that if you achieve it, if you get there, then you just have to be competent after that. So it forces, but in a good way, it leads you to ask two very useful questions. What does competence look like regarding achieving this result? So if you're trying to get a contract signed, then it might be, you can ask, all right, what does it look like after I meet someone and there's some certain interaction that's going to end up being our semi-soft lock, some interaction shy of them just fully saying yes. And I'm using this to illustrate that, again, this concept applies to any result you're trying to get. I'm just using to sign a contract to explain what I mean. So the semi-soft lock idea gets you to ask the following, to touch the question, related question. One is, what does competence look like once I achieve something where if I'm just competent, then they're going to say yes, or a relevant number of people are going to say yes, like the reasonably good prospect, which I might not know in advance, are you going to say yes or something, or maybe nearly everyone will say yes, depending on the product or service you're selling in the industry and so forth. So what does competence look like? And you get there, right? And achieving competence is constantly doable. It doesn't mean you're the best in the world. Doesn't even mean you're in the top 10%. It just means you're competent, means you can, it's not supposed to be a precise term, but it has a meaning that's good enough for this. As a matter of fact, it's a fat target, which we want here. It has a clear meaning, but it's also a little bit vague in a way that makes it easy to hit. It's not that difficult once you know you're going for it. And once you're not just starting by thinking that you should already be competent, right? That's the real block to competence, is feeling like you're stupid if you're not already competent. That makes you arrogant and makes you rush, right? And so identify competence, right? Same thing with ranking a website. Okay, if I can get something to the second page, then if I'm competent, I can get it out of the first page over some time, right? And so knowing what competence looks like to get it from the second page to the first page, for example. Then the semi-soft lock would be getting it to the second page for a particular term. These are, again, somewhat vague notions, but they also have a clear enough meaning that they get you to ask the right questions and that get you to, practically speaking, hit the right targets, right? So there's two targets. There's achieving competence, and there's figuring out and achieving the specific semi-soft lock. It might be that competence might mean that you have a good, like, system and understanding of talking to prospects for client SEO. You have a set of questions and diagnostic questions that you ask them that they value, and that also helps you sell your services. Like Jake Turner showed us an example of that, right? In one of my early dimensionalities that he appeared on. I think the fifth one. So that, combined with knowing how to rank and what you're going to do to fulfill in your own head, and knowing generally your audience overall and how to talk to people in that audience within reason, right? So you have a competent funnel. We could call it a competent, both kind of understanding, a sense of a vision that you share with them of what will be good for their business, and a sense of a flexible sense of that where you would tailor it to different types of people or situations. That might be competence, right? Doesn't mean you have to be unbelievable and always say the right thing at the right time and read people perfectly or anything like that. You don't have to be a savant, just competent. And then the semi-soft block might be that they fill out a form, or that they agree to meet with you in a certain way or whatever. And then once you have the competence, that's like, competence is something you can just have on lockdown, right? Like, you got it, right? You have it set. Then you just put all your focus and resources into achieving that semi-soft lock. Okay, can I get appointments with people if that's totally what I focus on and what I invest in? So the idea with the semi-soft lock idea is that you can achieve it if you really invest in just that, because you've narrowed it down where all you have to do is hit that and the rest is going to follow and you're all set, right? So then when it comes to these three things in business, as we tie this together here, if you really are strong in any one of these three things, then that can give you such an advantage that you only have to be competent with the other two. And again, competent really doesn't kind of always achievable competence. It's different than like excellency, right? Just competent. So if you're excellent at one of these in a sense, and you can get excellent by whichever one you particularly gravitate to, for me, it tends to be product fulfillment, right? All else being equal, I'd probably go there, but that might just be my bias. I'm not sure. And so the semi-soft lock idea is a bit holographic, or iterates, where you can look at business as a whole this way, right? Where you say, all right, my semi-soft lock is going to be, I'm going to create a strong product, right? Which is going to be keeping the audience in mind too, right? I ended up moving audience down. Oh, yeah. I have something on another slide that relates to that. Distracted me for a second. But, okay, so that gives you a sense of a semi-soft lock. I think I've described that enough. And I think you could probably see what I mean, at least by when I say that if you excel at one of these, then you need to be competent at the other two. And competence is, remember though, it's not something you achieve by just deciding you are. And the block to competence is going to be feeling like you're in any kind of rush, anything where you should have the framework for it already. If there's something wrong with you, if it takes you a while to get competent with one of the other two, competence might not happen fast with the other two, but competence is guaranteed in a sense, if you understand what I mean. You can always achieve competence in the way that I mean it, with some amount of focus. And so if you're quite strong in one of these, you can always get to competence, but it might take you some time. And if you're in a rush, it could block you from achieving even competence in one of the other two. Okay, so good. So I think you're starting to see how this whole thing here, this whole model is like its own lock, right? Because by understanding this, it's all inevitable, right? You're like, all right, yeah, I can become pretty dominant, pretty, very strong at one of these. And then I can, if I'm not in a rush, I can achieve competence with the other two. And then I'm simply going to make money and really basically a lot of it at that point, if you want to. And there's really nothing that can get in the way of that. So it's nice. That's what's nice about understanding overall frames is it gives you an accurate, for good reason, you have a feeling of kind of calmness and power from having the frame set properly. So much of our lives comes from compensating, like trying to believe that we have the right frame already when we don't. And that's like a drug that feeds upon itself. We get more and more afraid. We're invested in that our frame is already right. And then we need to desperate to maintain that belief and not have failure or indications or feedback that it's not right. And then, because then we feel like it all fault. Once we flip that script and we get the frame right, then this virtuous cycle in our favor. And that's what we're doing in this series, obviously. All right, let's go on to the next slide, which is kind of like the first new slide for this. All right, now I had audience creep back into maybe the relationship part of things. Maybe I'll think about this further and come up with something that is even extra helpful or hones things even further. I'm not sure. Regardless, these three things are certainly going to be very helpful for you. Let me think, just do a quick think here with relationships. I think maybe I will take this audience thing and I'll put it down here actually. And didn't work. All right. Okay, great. And then let's say with relationships, and there is something regarding that I meant by this audience thing that, anyway, I'm going to split the idea up properly here. All right. So these isn't perfectly precise, right? So there's a meaning of audience that'll apply to the relationship kind of traffic or the former traffic idea. And then there's a meaning that will apply with product. So what I want to say here, so there's let me also now distract us a bit by changing that. But the overall idea of this slide is a certain thing. We're going to be in one metaphorical way of illustrating it. If we have, we could say platform or framework, we could also almost think of a factory. If we have a factory that can make or widen the road is another way to put it for the relationship component of business. If we have a factory or a framework or a platform, those are different illustrations, but they all lead to the same thing, are widening the road. We want a way that we're expanding our options, basically, and expanding our ability to implement, which kind of go hand in hand, expanding the questions that we ask, how easily we can act on ideas, and so forth. We can see this pretty easily with when I say a framework for implementing product ideas. If we imagine like Liz Herrera, right, who teaches about Amazon with OMG, and she's phenomenally successful with Amazon. She has multiple product brands that are worth 6 figures or 7 figures. One's even worth about 5 million that she's built up, right? And she tests and makes different products. She's had accounts shut down with experimenting with different things. And so she's earned her success and just knows so much. But one of the things that she's built, and you can picture having this and then picture not and the difference of it. One of the things that she's built is an ability to twofold. One is in her own mind, she notices product ideas wherever she goes, right? Like she'll notice that she's at a place and they're sold out of a little widget or a cover for some such, or like a Marriott for an iPhone or some new thing that they have, or like she'll just notice that kind of stuff, right? So in her mind, she's noticing that stuff. I don't really notice that with like physical products, like retail type products. I have it in a bit of a parallel with certain types of info products. But stick to her, I don't think that way, but for her, she does. However, she also has both an understanding and actual contacts in a system for getting products made. So she knows so much about getting products made. For her, she has a whole framework. It's like she has a factory between her own understanding, her experience, and the people she knows and actual contacts she has, presumably even contracts that she has with suppliers and manufacturers and so forth. Where if she wants to implement a product where she gets it made, gets it delivered, reasonably likely that it'll be good quality, that sort of thing, she can do that. And there's not like a big gap or difficulty or black box right? A vague area of like fear of uncertainty and confusion with getting it made. Whereas I would feel that, right? In an ultimate meta way, I know that I can build the framework and eventually get to where I don't feel that. But currently I would feel that with making a hard good, whatever you call it, retail. I want to call them e-commerce products because these products are sold obviously outside of just e-commerce. I'm forgetting what the actual name of hard goods are. Maybe it's hard goods. So feel that difference. Can you feel that difference between if you have that and if you don't? And if you have a product idea and you don't have that framework for implementing, in practice, it's a huge difference, right, in business. And so not only is it more difficult to act on it, but you often just realistically won't act on it. And it's going to take a lot of emotional energy. There's certain psychological experiments. I don't have a lot of knowledge of this, but I know it a bit anecdotally. And at some point, I'll probably look into it more. But there's apparently experiments and theories that bear out the idea that if you're like making difficult decisions or even doing things that you don't want to do during the day, there's only a certain amount of time you can realistically spend each day, like doing what you don't want to do. Think if it's necessary, then you do what it takes. But if it's like a little unnecessary, and what I mean is if you do stuff with your family that you don't really want to do that much for a couple of hours, then there's a way that it's much harder to come home and do something you don't really feel like doing for building a business for yourself. Again, the exception to that, I think, is if it's necessary, but I think something that doesn't feel totally necessary, right? Like if you have a job and you can eat, then I think people get in that cycle, right? Where they're doing stuff they don't want to do with their family to some degree. I don't mean that they don't like their family. They probably love their family, like them, but then sometimes do things they don't want to do. And then that I think drains them for wanting to do more of that kind of optional discretionary spending of time, so to speak. So that's like a resource, right? How much we do that's going out on a limb, delving into a black box. A black box is like something where you don't know what's inside, where it's like new to you, right? Or getting outside of your box is the same result, right? The different ways of saying the same type of thing where, right, you're like, what does it say? You're trying to get a product made, but you don't really know what you're doing and you don't have a framework for it. Or you're even trying to think of a product and you're not used to like looking around, right? Like professional comedians who are successful, they kind of notice jokes throughout their day, right? They often have a pen and paper notebook. Maybe they have their BlackBerry or their iPhone, of course, these days. But I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them still use paper notebooks like I do. There's something about having an actual paper and pen notebook for ideas. And throughout their day, so they have a mental system where they're aware of it and a physical counterpart to where they write it down in some way and they'll notice jokes because you don't just necessarily sit there for an hour and think of jokes. You have to have this kind of magnet, this kind of open, sticky area for it in your mind throughout the day, right? And so you can see how if it's like effortless for you to to think of and make and implement products, then that getting outside your box, questioning assumptions, doing something that you're not very familiar with, you can do that with something else, some other component of business. And otherwise, now when you're starting out, you have to do this with most everything, but that's okay. That's why you break business into three parts and you just focus on one. The nice thing about product in a lot of cases, unless it's a fad, a particular like narrow window, is you can get it straight and take some time doing so. And you're pretty safe while you're doing that. You're like just doing it. And as long as you can feed yourself and shelter yourself while you're doing it, you can take your time and get it right. Now, the problem is, however, when you're new, if you're busy doing that, you end up being in a position where you're so all in on one product that now you're needing to force it to market, which is why while you're doing that, while you're getting one product made, what you really want to be doing is both intellectually and emotionally realize that what you're really doing is investing in building a framework for making product. And that regardless how your product turns out that you make first, you can, by also what I'm explaining right now, if you see this idea and the immense value and difference it is as you build like a framework or what amounts to like a manufacturing plant for making product, the manufacturing plant that being your understanding in your own mind and then your actual contacts and stuff that you know about the world out there, right? Where to get stuff and not just contacts, but anything out there in the world that that you build access to, right? Because you have knowledge of it and or because you have relationships or actual contracts and so forth. So it's that framework that's going to really open things up for you when it comes to product. An amateur mistake is to not realize that about how much easier it's going to be the next time. An observational rule that I developed for myself that sort of approximated this and helped me with this was something I actually noticed this during laboratory class in college, right? You take in college, if you're doing the hard sciences, you take like biology and then you have biology lab that goes with it, where you show up and you have to do stuff with like test tubes and a flask and so forth. And there were some procedures that you would do on like a distillation, and then it would take a while, and I may or may not do it very well. But then I noticed the next time I did a distillation, it would just become like part of some other thing that we're doing, and it's 8 times easier literally, which is counterintuitive. We figure something's easier the second time, but the 8, right, the number 8-to-1 rule is surprising in that I found that it was like that much easier. So it's way easier often the second time. And what's going on is the framework exists in the second case and didn't exist in the first case. Of course, you might do something once and not end up really building a framework for it. But once you have a framework, then something is radically easy. So it's not about exactly it being the second time or the third time or not, but it can be easy. People that don't realize about the concept of frameworks, instead by association, associative type thinking, which people do by default, that's how brains work by default always, but you can add on an awareness of frameworks to your mind, which radically affects your success in life. What does associative thinking tell you? If you do a distillation for the first time in biology lab or chemistry lab, or whatever, wherever you do that, or chemistry, then if you do that the first time and it takes you 2 hours and it's a pain in the ass, then by association and a little bit of extrapolation, right, is how our brain works by default, then you think, oh, I hate distillation. It's so hard. I don't want to do that again. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier the next time. But like when people extrapolate, they carry out a line, they're just going to carry it out a little bit, right? That's why the 8-to-1 rule really changes that, because you don't just extrapolate and say, oh, it'll be a little easier. But mostly just think, oh, I hate distilling. It takes forever. Oh no. So what people do in business, in all the components of business that will really screw them up, is they'll do something the first time. It'll be very difficult because it's the first time and because they're attached to the result instead of being attached to building the framework in a certain way, meaning they associate a negative feeling with not achieving the result instead of just realizing that what they're really going to do is build the framework. And that's whether you attach a negative feeling or not to building, whether you have a framework, a framework will always be built if you allow it to be built. So they'll do something and they'll just associate or remember that it was hard, and they just won't get to the benefit in life of having a framework, right? Because they'll just look for the next thing. Oh, maybe the next thing will be much easier. And this is by observation. People call this shiny object or syndrome when people do it, but that doesn't explain the cure. It doesn't really diagnose. It doesn't really basically misdiagnoses the problem and doesn't show the solution. The problem is not understanding the framework. The minute you understand the framework idea, it's like magic, right? Because now you don't worry about, it's not about shiny objects anymore, because you just get addicted to building useful frameworks instead of chasing after what's going to work without a framework. And everything you tried before sucked, because everything you try for the first time doesn't have you don't have a framework in most cases, or you try something and you can by luck have a framework by other experience you've had in life. And you're like, oh, I love that. And then you try to force that to be your business. Whereas you might end up then forcing something where you have to convert and build relationships. You're trying to build relationships around a product that it doesn't waveform with people, right? It doesn't intersect with people very well. So if you're narrow-minded with one of the aspects of business, or a part of one of the aspects, and then that ends up making you narrow with one of the aspects, it's like the opposite of a semi-soft lock, right? You end up dropping the ball with one of these, and then you end up putting yourself so behind the game when you're trying to build relationships and get people to decide to buy. And that's where, in one sense, I just described to you why failure happens in business. And you pretty much can't fail in business or in life once you understand the framework idea. As a matter of fact, I really want to devote basically a series. I want to prepare for it first and then devote a series to talking about frames. And there's so much to do with them in so many ways that I use the idea, including foundationally and so forth. So that one thing can be your semi-soft lock. The thing being, if you build, metaphorically speaking, a manufacturing plant, again, between your own mind, mental model and questions and mental framework you have, plus actual resources in the world for implementing a certain type of product. That even could be finding affiliate offers, right? And not just finding affiliate offers means more than just a list of potential affiliate offers. If you have a real manufacturing plant for it, a real framework for it, then you know what to look for yourself, what not to look for, who's likely to pay out and with integrity, and what looks like it'll convert pretty well. You might be saying, wait, conversion isn't that product? No, like your framework for looking for good products when it comes to, you're thinking of what you're trying to do with fulfillment. And this is a little bit somewhat a new take on it. Actually, what I'm about to say is fulfillment carries the idea that you're fulfilling to a person, right? It's another good thing about the word fulfillment, the concept that goes to the word fulfillment, is a product kind of sits there by itself in a certain way. And a service is like you're doing it to someone. Fulfillment, I guess you could, again, words have different meanings, but there's a way that we can add to that. You're fulfilling with an audience, right? Like with a particular person typically, and then with an audience. And sometimes you're fulfilling to even a group buys your product. So you're fulfilling to an audience. And so the fulfillment is tailored, right, to an audience because when you're fulfilling, you're fitting it into a frame that has to exist, right? Like a receptor from the person buying it. And so part of thinking, like you're fitting your fulfillment into what a certain segment of people want and what certain individuals want. So you need to it's like a puzzle piece, puzzle piece. And you have to be aware of your piece, which is like what you call your product or service. But then you have to be aware of obviously the puzzle itself, right? You have to look at both. If you're putting a jigsaw puzzle together, you look at your piece you have in your hand that you picked up, and you look at what's already built of the puzzle, right? And you try to fit them together. So there's a certain aspect to audience that has to do with them wanting to pay for, like I talked about before, a product, right? Product, service, a certain fulfillment result. But you can be competent with looking at what you built of the jigsaw puzzle, looking at an audience. If you're really strong at being able to implement and make a product that you think of and hone it, you make it better if you need to and so forth. But if you have a way to do that, then that's one example. You don't have to do it. You don't have to take that as your semi-soft block, your stand. But even if you don't, it still is on the same path to competence in this area, right? With your product. With all of these things, I have the word framework for all of them. If you have a sort of manufacturing plant or framework or platform for getting products implemented, and I don't mean like any product in the world, right? But just a wide enough area that you can be flexible enough to make everything else work, right? You follow me? If I'm only good at making information products in one or a few niches, that can be plenty as long as that gives me enough flexibility to bring a product to market that's successful, right? With just reasonable competence in the other areas, right? Or if I'm very strong in one of the other areas, like I have great relationships that are going to make something work, that as long as I'm just reasonably competent at getting a product made, right? But there's a way that your fear goes away. You get a certain calm confidence every time you have a frame, right? So and building a framework is constantly doable. It's not a hard thing. It's neither kind of hard nor easy. It's something that if you invest a reasonable amount of resources and are aware of the phenomenon of frameworks, then you can do it. Right. And given that this is money here, this is business, it's important enough in your life that it's going to work out great. Right. That the amount of resources that you're going to need to invest to build a framework for each of these things is going to be very much reasonable and worth it. So what blocks people when it comes to product, and by that I mean it in the expansive word, fulfillment, right? Making something to fulfill, creation of this product and fulfillment and so forth, is not having the framework for it, right? And then now I think after all this talking I've done, you should be able to have a sense of what I mean by that framework in practical terms. I don't want to just use this sort of somewhat vague word framework, but you see how it is with Liz. With me, it's a little bit similar with making info products, right? When I can think of a product idea, and I do, and then make it actually happen, both technologically, I have contacts with and knowledge of people that can make the product, right, and so forth. OMG is built in a way now where I have several people to call on, right? So I can make product anytime I want, right? Between thinking of it and thinking of one that'll work and getting it done top to bottom, it's all very doable. talking to someone a few months ago in my general niche, and they were running into that. And they didn't even know what they were running into. Is they were basically trying to force a product, and then they had someone who would help them sell. Like they had maybe a $50 product. They had someone who would help them market like a $500 product if they just put it together. But they didn't really have the resources to put it together. But they didn't know that. They were just thought they could do it, but they didn't realize that they didn't have the framework for it. In essence, when someone's trying to do something they don't have the framework for, they're trying to use like often like positive thinking, right? To, okay, yeah, we can do this, or I'll get a guy to do that. It's vague and positive at the same time. Of course, it can be negative as well. But a lot of people are, yeah, I can do that. I'll just get it done. I'll just ask this guy can contribute this, and I'll interview this person. But it ends up, if you look for it, ends up being a bunch of wishful thinking. And that's not me being negative on their idea when I say that, right? Wishful thinking could end up being lucky and work, right? But when you're thinking based on having a framework already, it looks good, right? And you can come to know the difference. I can't really describe it like instantly, but I gave you that somewhat of an example there. Okay. So if we get what I mean by the four things here, where I have the framework for the waveform idea I described, let me give you a little kind of an anecdote. I've used it in the past. You might have heard me say it, but it doesn't matter. It just, as long as I illustrate this, then we're golden with this. But it's night and day for me in practice, in application. I had difficulty with like having a fun, nice friend situation for myself in much of my childhood and kind of young adulthood. I meandered into a successful period of time in like mid to late high school. And then I wandered back out of it because I didn't really understand how it worked or what was making it work in college. And it really wasn't until my fourth year of college that I actually really figured it out in particular. And it would have been really nice for me if I had figured it out when I was much younger. And a lot of you have heard me explain this, perhaps, but again, it doesn't matter. It's just the way to explain this idea. As long as you get it, then we're in good shape. But the practical difference, and that was that I'm like a gamer. I like to play games with people. It doesn't have to be computer games. It can be board games, certain types of card games. And these days, in practice, I play computer games. But in late college, a lot of it was like board games or Magic, which was played physically with cards. I played in high school. We ended up having a bunch of friends. We would get together and play various games, and I loved it. And we had an easy time getting together, hanging out. It wasn't worried about whether they would call me on the weekends or whether they want me there. And then the other thing, it's not just not being able to make friends. The problem is you get confused on what to do to become successful. And I know that a lot of you are running into this with business and networking and so forth to some degree. And what happens is, like for me, when I'm going to like a non-gaming get together or any situation, or I'm in a college dorm where I don't realize that gaming is where I'm going to intersect with people in a certain friendship type of way. It's when the frame is wrong. Now, theoretically, when I realize that, I could expand my frame and have other ways to interact with people that we naturally click. But that's at least recognizing that is critical. I didn't recognize that either. It's also it's a kind of probably a big endeavor to do that. And maybe it is, but one way or the other, if you find your own kind of wavelength that you're on, then the first thing you can try is just recognizing that and getting with people, finding ways to get with people on your same wavelength. And that, once the conclusion is trite and obvious, but the premise is not. And the conclusion people normally draw is they'll go out and network, or in the friend situation, you'll just go out, you'll be at a gathering or party, and you'll just conclude, oh, I don't really like parties. Or you'll make some friends, but you'll feel like maybe you're not that friendly, or people don't like you all that much because they like you, but they don't really think to call you on Friday and Saturday. I would have friends that like we would hang out, we'd get together, but like often they would just go out without me and not really think to call me, like in college before I realized about the gaming type. Whereas I didn't change my personality. It wasn't what I was saying or doing. It was just I didn't realize the wavelength I was on. And when I got with other people on the wavelength, it was all the easiest thing in the world and never even had to think about it. I would just have people to get together with, including on the weekends. Like in college, I mean, in life, in normal life as well, but in college it's pretty pronounced with the week we hang out with on weekend versus weekdays. Okay. And it's like your real friends are the ones that like invite you again or think to invite. But the difference is so immense. And then I saw it again, just as immense with my wife. Like again, I've shared all this, but in the past, but where with her, it's people that like Russian, generally women that are Russian, or basically always like with her friends are basically Russian women in America. Here, she's in America, but she also has good friends still from Russia, where she goes back to friendships. So it's not in either of our cases that our nose is up in the air that we don't want to be friends with other people. I have people I'm friendly with and that I like outside of gaming, but there's something where it's not natural and easy, and it has nothing to do with feeling superior, feeling aloof, or anything like that. And the trouble is when you don't recognize this, you think there's something wrong with you fundamentally, like you're just not a friendly person, or maybe people don't like you or what's wrong, or you think there's something wrong with other people where they're two-faced, they're not friendly or whatever. But it's just a wavelength thing. It's not an absolute thing at all. The wavelength thing with dating comes in a different way, right? I don't have a category of women that I particularly click with. Although weirdly enough, like international type, like-minded women tend to click with me better, even though I'm not really internationally minded, but I guess metaphorically I'm out of the box or something. But regardless, with dating, it's more of just you feel it, right? Like some people you naturally easily click with. But if you don't have that idea, there's an opposite, or not opposite, but in practice, mutually exclusive idea that's generally out there in culture. It's acted out on sitcoms and dramas all the time, which is this idea that if you spot someone that you like and you earn their love and respect, right? It's just about how great you are plus how good a job you do getting them, right? And people say things like, why does she like him instead of me? I'm better than him, right? Or that sort of thing, vice versa, her and him. So once you're saying that, it implies that it's like an absolute thing, right? Or you could apply it to friendships. Why do they want to be friends with them and not me? Why am I worse? What are they stuck up? And so we'll blame them, we'll blame ourselves. And all of a sudden with the wavelength idea, you stop blaming everyone, neither yourself nor other people. And it's this magical difference. Like in practice, it's massive difference. Um, and that is a critical thing for relationship, right? That when you realize that, then another thing you can do, it's another reason why connectors can be such a great thing, because in business, I can intersect in a business sense with a lot like more than just gamers, right? Because while we're working on a business project, it's just that we won't naturally become like close friends. We can say we are and feel very nice toward each other, but in practice, we won't like be traveling to hang out with each other or on the phone like constantly. One thing with a connector in practice is that some people in general might just connect with more people because that's just somehow how they are, or there might be some distinctions on myself I'm not recognizing, but just eyeballing it in practice, someone and it's also why just referrals in general can work well, even if we don't label people as connectors. It's helpful to have that label and understand that. But even also outside of that label, you might connect with someone really easily because your wavelengths intersect. The people that you need to reach in business might be different, but the person you connect with, you can hang out with people you connect with, and they can refer you in a business sense to other people. And that's mostly what I've done and what I would do. And my advice to you is, of course, you can hang out with more people. I'm not saying restrict who you hang out with. That's not my point here either. But there's something, when you don't recognize this idea, then you keep on like trying to invest in the wrong place. Again, it's if someone's dating and they don't realize that they can click with certain people, they overinvest and beat themselves up or judge or get upset at the other person where they don't have the intersection. And then they don't get to where they realize where they have the intersection. And so you just get your resources all screwed up, like where you invest them. And also your emotions screwed up and blaming other people, judging them. And also just don't try to force a wavelength. You don't have to be friends with someone you do business with. See, a lot of people, they feel like there's something wrong, like they can't do business with someone. But now they won't refuse business. They won't refuse someone buying their product, but they'll lock themselves out of relationships that could be helpful for business because they feel like they also have to be buds and friends. I don't try to do that. I don't push it away. I can vibe with someone for a little while if I need to, no problem. But what I mean is I don't like the main thing is if I don't naturally vibe with somebody that could be a business contact and separate from, I'm not going to say that I just pretend to, I will. What people will do intuitively is they'll feel like something is wrong and they'll be like, oh, I don't click with that person. But I accept that I don't click with lots of people. Like the normal idea is people think they should click with like good people, right? And so they feel like if they don't click with someone, the person is like less of a good or valuable person. And what I realize is there can be a lot of value in a way that's a trite, but in practice, I see people violating this nonstop. I make sure not to get, but what it does is it creates a frame. If someone's physically unattractive, then there's all kinds of disadvantages, all kinds of ways people buy less stuff from them and so forth, right? And no one would intellectually affirm that they would do that, but you can measure it all over the place with physical attractiveness and all sorts of judging someone to be more intelligent, more likely to buy from them, all sorts of stuff, right? So this works in the same way. If you're, and that's a great way to explain it, is again, no one, if I just came out and said, hey, just because someone's not physically attractive, not attractive, but attractive to you, doesn't mean that they're not that smart or you shouldn't buy. Everyone would say, duh, what are you saying that for, dude? But what's profound is that in practice, people act the opposite. So there's another thing that happens in parallel, which is that if you don't vibe with someone, like in the same way that my wife does with Russian people, or like I with Russian women, or like I do with gamers, and neither of us picked it. I don't think gamers are better, and she doesn't think like Russian women are better, right? It's not, again, I don't think that I'm better or I'm not aloof or whatever. It's just natural. By recognizing that, I intentionally overcome the not clicking sense, not to be friends with them, because that is going to constantly be swimming upstream, but to be allies with them wherever the intersection does happen. So just because we don't intersect in kind of a click, interpersonal clicking way that's related to like friendship, that's irrelevant. And I'm not saying, oh, I do business with people I don't like. What I'm saying is that I realize consciously, hey, wait a second, just metaphorical to if you find someone physically attractive, you're going to be biased toward them in a number of ways. You're going to find them funnier, more intelligent, and so forth. Then it's going to be the same way in business with people you don't click with. And they're going to have the same kind of assumption about you. But what you can do is if you overcome it for yourself, what you do is you bypass friendship and just don't make it an issue. And I try not to put myself in situations where we're like doing friendship, hanging out in order to enhance our business. Because it basically won't. It'll basically back. And that's another thing people can get wrong, right? Is that they'll put themselves in positions to hang out with, which they think someone that they don't really vibe with naturally, like me hanging out with a non-gamer, right? Where they think it'll help them with their business relationship with that person, but it actually will probably backfire to some degree. It won't necessarily backfire. Anyone can have a nice time for one meeting or in a group setting. But if you try to repeat it or have it be more than like once or very limited interaction, like you can easily have a nice dinner with someone. Like I can have a nice dinner with someone that's enjoyable and we have a nice conversation. It's not a game. Right? But if I made that like a constant backdrop to our relationship, by the way, if someone's outside of the category you think you are, but you naturally vibe with them easily, it doesn't disprove what I'm saying. It just means there's some other good wavelength thing going on and great. So anytime there obviously is a good wavelength intersection, like with friendship or whatever, and you feel it, regardless whether you can identify it as a category that you belong to, of course, go with it. But whenever there isn't, don't force it. Don't create a situation where it's going to be actually be counterproductive, and don't think that there's something wrong with the other person or with you. And just there's plenty. You can just have good business alliances. Again, obvious in one sense when I say it, but in practice, it's not obvious. People in there constantly think there's something wrong with them or the other people. A lot of people that think they don't like networking, their issue is not finding the people that they naturally vibe with, either as a subsection of a group or going to groups that have that. That's why I've said in the past, if you focus on your hobby, right, you'll end up doing this naturally where you vibe with the people easily and you just get referrals from them. Rather than trying to skip that step, go straight to the networking event where you don't click with people. Now, a lot of you guys will be able to go straight to the networking event and be fine. But if you're having trouble with it, you might have an issue that I'm more likely to run into too, personally, where I might be in the minority, but it's still a sizable group of us, right? Where do the intermediate step of hang out with your hobbies. For me, if I'm in my hobby, all of a sudden I can network like a champ, like night and day, right? Did I change? No. It's just these are people I vibe with easily. So know to look for that. Once you're aware of the waveform idea overall, and there's a lot of applications of the waveform idea, right? It's not just who you're friends with, but that illustrates. And then looking for intersections with, even when you're doing in sales, there's things that lead to the decision, but there's also knowing in the backdrop to be looking for these intersections, right? So these waveform intersections happen on all over the place with human interactions and relationships. And the friendship thing is a subsection of that. But, and again, in popular culture that will absorb, there's all these ideas that are mutually exclusive with it, which is that if you're friendly, that's how you make friends. If you earn that somebody likes you by being better than the other person, and so they're your competitor for the date, right? That's all over the place, right? How do I get her to like me, rather than mostly how do I remove blocks? If we have a waveform that intersects, then it's just about removing blocks. Then just all you have to do is understand your way to success, or just interact your way. Understanding can happen naturally just by interacting, right? I don't mean you like grill the person, give them the third degree. Okay. So that means that understanding the waveform idea is like your factory for relationships, right? It'll widen your ability to have relationships, broaden and increase your competence, your functional competence with it, but by just having the framework for the idea itself. And then you'll naturally start to build a framework with actual relationships with people, right? By going out and looking for people that you have a good waveform with, right? And then that's that. So that's gonna get rid of your blocks generally for regarding relationships. It's just this way for like, including all the ways that you think you blame the other person, or you think that you're doing something wrong, when it's just the waveforms don't fit. That's it. Nothing. No one's doing anything wrong. Of course, there's different potential waveforms a person can be vibing on, right? That you can identify different ways that you did different moods, identify with different groups, different parts of the day. You can find things in common. There's a pretty funny and good illustration of this in Big Bang Theory in the first season. I think, yeah, it was the first season where Wallowitz, the little Jewish guy, he's presented as such. That's like clearly an Indian guy, Asian Indian, and a guy who's clearly Jewish. And that's kind of part of their shtick. When I say, like, it's his own category for himself, not one that I'm imposing on. But anyway, the little Jewish guy, and he meets his wife to be, and then a girlfriend. And on their first date, at first they're like not vibing at all, and then they find something that has to do with their interaction with their parent, where they're on the same wavelength, that it somehow makes them soulmates for real. Yeah, they basically do great together. Of course, you don't necessarily have to identify the waveform in the first impression or the first interaction. But over time, if something doesn't emerge, then it's neither of yours fault necessarily, right? And over investing, what you want to invest in finding within a particular person, and finding within a group, and both intersecting waveforms. That's where you invest. Instead, the popular, normal, so to speak, idea is that you invest in making things work with somebody rather than finding the waveform. Thinking of the waveforms as relatively fixed might seem productive, or might seem like it makes you narrow-minded, but it actually, functionally speaking, it's great. So figure that out. Okay, two other things here, two other lines. So on this, the Totalfly says it'll work like magic if you build it for yourself. And then I list things for each of the three aspects of this: the framework, the waveform idea, which relates to relation. Next, I'll get to the decision, which is going to say framework for creating vision, justification, and thingness. Something I've talked about before, but I'll say a few more things about it now. But if you have this framework, it's going to get you so far ahead that then you can start to assimilate the other things that are necessary for helping someone make a decision, right? The waveform idea is going to create the relationship that's going to create the backdrop for the decision. The framework idea overall is going to help you think about categories with help people making decisions and so forth. But I'll talk in a second about the vision and justification. And then the rest of the slide is, I have two lines for the product, the fulfillment. One is one that I've already talked about, the framework for implementing product ideas. And the other is framework for audience, finding, learning about, et cetera. Right? Because we want to move audience out of what was previously traffic. We want to move it out of the relationship thing and more into that you're fitting the fulfillment, the product, the service, the result to an audience, right? And so they go together as one component of this. Of course, to that audience, you then want to have relationships. And then including being introduced and then having an ongoing relationship. And then, of course, you want to get the audience to make a decision, right? I guess maybe we could put audience on the side that relates to all three. I don't know how you wanna that, but or draw it out, sketch it out for yourself. But the amounts to that the same thing, right? So I'll talk about the audience thing, and then I'll finish up this slide with the decision, vision, justification. So framework for an audience. I think this is something. One person that jumps out at me that thinks about this is very well is Stephen Floyd. And I may have relayed this anecdote at some point, but he had a business. I don't know if this came before or after he built like a computer repair business. That's where he first got into SEO. And he built that up. A lot of it was with natural traffic. I'm sure he mixed some paid traffic in there too for business for that. And then that's what really built the business. Oh, and as a matter of fact, though, that was him thinking about audience, right? Is how do I reach an audience for computer repair? And that audience, the people that are interested in that, are the type of thing that really particularly go to Google, right? There's not like a lot of, I mean, I guess there's maybe Best Buy or something, but there's not a lot of retail places that are obvious about computer repair so much as one way or the other, people will look on Google for that sort of thing when they have a computer problem. And of course, some people might do other things, but there's plenty of an audience that looks on Google. And that was a particularly reachable thing, he thought, if I can learn how to do search optimization, right? This is roughly 12 years ago, it might have been 14 years ago. I don't know exactly. And so he thought about the audience and then he thought about how to get to it, right? That's different than relationship, noticed, right? Relationship would be, I mean, it does involve the introduction to it, but you're basically, it's really, so he would think about audience and then he developed a system for getting to that audience with Google. But totally separately, which kind of shows his kind of meta way of thinking about audience. He was with some partners and they were doing I think mortgage loans, something to do with mortgage loans or some form of loans. I think they're related to mortgage. But he thought about where can we get an audience? And it took him a little while, it took him a couple of months, he said. But the other people were linear that were trying to make sales with it. But with him, he thought about it and he developed a particular relationship with someone that got him into speaking in front of a bunch of people with credit repair. And I think on a bit of an ongoing basis. And people with credit repair, it was mortgages for people that had a hard time getting a loan, like high risk loans. And where are you likely to find an audience for that is with people that are also looking for credit issue. So he developed a specific with a guy that got him to be able to talk in front of these people, I think on a regular basis. And that made the business really take off. It really blew out that business once again. So there's a way that Stephen thinks about audience and he stops and thinks about it. And he has a framework in his mind for thinking about it a little bit like Liz looks for e-commerce product, right? Or retail. And then one way is with SEO, but then you can develop other ways when you're trying to meet like prospective clients, is you want to think about your audience, not just who your audience is, but that I love the credit repair example because it shows that an audience for one thing can intersect really well, right? We learned this with OMG, an audience for like success philosophy with Bob Proctor, and especially when Ty was focused on that. When Ty shifted his focus to like digital marketing, it was actually less effective in terms of conversion rate, like amount of traffic and how likely they would buy our course. It was still lots of sales, but when Ted Lopez was doing 66, I think it was 66, 67 steps or something or had a bunch like a book a month where it was these self-improvement books. He was focused on that. And that was his customer base. And he had a lot of them. And that was what he was advertising about and reaching and talking about. Then those people really liked OMG. And it was a great audience to find prospects for OMG. And then with Bob Proctor, it's not the only good audience. There's other good audiences, but finding those opens up a whole thing for us, right? And so often it'll be that kind of intersection because often there'll be a place where you can find a group of people that'll pay attention. And you want to think about that and then find whether that overlap is a good way to put it. An intersection I put with the waveforms. So an overlap between those. So one way or the other, thinking about audience, having more of a broad mental model for audience and how to find it, how to get to it. And that's again where connectors can come into play. Or it's obvious with influencers, right? Influencers are more like the obvious thing people go for. Oh, they like the idea that this guy can just tell his people to buy my product and they all will. That is like that's like the idea of a hard lock or a soft lock or whatever, instead of a semi-soft lock. 'Cause it's a lot harder to get to an influencer, and often influencers aren't nearly as much influencers as you think they. Like, it's not really true that an influencer can just go buy this guy's product, and they will in many cases, right? Once in a while, you get that with selling a book on if you're appear on Oprah, but usually that's going to be a low dollar product, by the way, where it'll be like that. And again, it's not that getting to an influencer is a bad idea, just that you don't want to be your only strategy because it's harder to get to, and it's often like less effective and more of a pain in the butt than you would think. Can still be very worth it. I've made a lot of money doing that or having Mike do it. But the first thing I did was really focus on the connector, like with Mike, and then he did a lot of that for me. So if you build a framework for audience finding, learning about, getting that sort of thing. So our audience is a thing to you that you're developing your ability to get to it. And every time you break through with finding an audience that kind of gets you some sales or prospects, then think about it in terms of the framework idea. Remember, where it's not just how well did that one thing work, or if you get a speaking engagement somewhere. Don't just think, oh, I really want this to work. I really want this to work. Sure, but that's that thing that leads to the shiny object syndrome, where you're getting negatively attached to the result of something you don't have the framework for. And where you're developing these associations to how that works out, and you develop stage fright and so forth. Instead, you think this is great because this will help me develop my understanding of audience in general, what to look for, what not to look for, how to talk to them once I get there, right, and so forth. Regarding the waveform relationship thing, a hint when you're talking to a group is talk to people that you do intersect with. And you don't know who they are. I'm saying you're addressing a group of 100 people or 30 people. What people will do is they'll try to get the worst person, like not all the time, but what people will do sometimes that'll block them or be ineffective is they'll be afraid of looking bad. The problem with being afraid of looking bad is we can see it better with the waveform idea, is you're trying to have a good wave intersection with someone that you don't have the wave for it. So you're like trying to make this wave that you don't have, and you just look all around and you stifle the wave that you do have. So you'll tend to not appeal to the people you could have appealed to. You're going to look buffoonish anyway to the people you're trying to appeal to that you don't know how to appeal to because you don't really have that wave naturally. If you fully develop the framework for a new wave, great, but you're not going to do that while you're talking, right? Or while you're talking one-on-one, or while you're talking to a group, while you're on a date, while you're networking at a meeting. You have the wave that you have then. So talk to people. When I say talk to people, I don't mean talk to individuals. You might be talking to an individual. You might be talking to a group. But when I say talk to people that are on your wavelength, address people as if they are, and then the people that are will respond. Even if it's one-on-one, you can talk to someone as if they're on your wavelength within reason. Obviously, you don't go on and just be ridiculous, right? If you're not vibing, they're not vibing. But you talk to them on the wavelength. Even when you're poking, talk about one thing you're excited about, or of course, let them talk about something they're excited about and see if you're on that. But then talk about another thing you're excited about, right? And then see where they go. But if you don't talk about things you're excited about, and instead you're just like grilling the person or trying to find what they're interested in and listening, but if that's not on your wave, it doesn't help that much to have someone talk about something that they're fascinated by and pretend like you're interested. It ruins the whole wavelength thing. Because maybe they're, right, again, you're investing. I'm going back to this waveform thing, but this is good for you to have. You're investing. If you're getting the person to talk about something they're really excited about, but you're not, you're doing the default thing. You're investing where there's no natural wave interaction, positive, constructive wave interaction, right? What happens then? You get a lose. Because that person might have even had a wave that was interesting to you, but you never get to it because you invested your time and your falseness, right? You fooled them and got them to invest falsely, right? In talking to you about this, and you didn't have a positive wave interaction. Instead, you want to invest in looking for the positive wave interaction. You look for it by sending out your positive wave. Think about it, right? You don't look for it by sending out a fake, crappy wave that you don't even know about, right? But trying to appeal to the wrong people. So if you're talking to a group, you don't have to be nervous. And when people say be yourself, what you want to do is get to know your ways. You want yourself to be understood reasonably by you, and you want to know the positive aspects of yourself. Just being yourself, if you don't understand the positive aspects of yourself, is not going to be helpful, right? Because being yourself might just mean being lame if you don't find and bring out the good ways in yourself, right? So be yourself, correct interpretation of it, which is why people say it, because the correct interpretation gets luckily stumbled upon sometimes, is you let your positive waves come out, and then that'll interact with other people that are on the same wavelength, and that's great. And then you'll make sales to those people now or later, or you'll make relationships, right? That will lead to sales or referrals to sales. If you try to talk again to everybody, or you're scared of the people that are going to be bored, then you'll lose everyone, or you risk losing it, or you're going to do bad strategy. You'll do something worse than you otherwise would. I think I illustrated that way, that in probably a way that made sense, pretty visual. Okay, I will continue. I'll explain the creating vision or justification. I'll take a minute break, and then I'll go to the Facebook group after I talk a bit about the vision. Justification part is the last thing on the slide. And then I still haven't gotten to the breakthrough kind of meta idea. And so but I actually will on this. I'm not going to put it off. I'll get it to on this webinar. Okay, I'll do it. All right. I never did a sound check with people. Everything cool? Presume it is, unless so. Great. Okay. I blew up all my test tubes. I know I understood the theory, like the conceptual aspect of the labs, but not I didn't really enjoy the actual not spilling the flammable materials all over the place part of it. Okay, looks like there's no sound issues. Russian woman. Depends on the Russian woman. My sound crapped out, but overall we're okay on sound, right? All right. So with the framework for creating vision, justification, and thingness, when we come to decision, here's the block. I'm focusing on overcoming or not getting blocked by blocks that come up as we succeed in these components of business. The block that people run into with decision making, sale, like getting other people to make decisions, which isn't like one word, sale. But the thing is not just sales. It's you have a nice few dates with a girl. She comes over, or regardless whether she comes over, you have a nice romantic interaction and that physical, and then she comes over the next day and you think that she's going to hop right into the same physical interaction. She might, but she might not. I say that to illustrate that here's the issue, that there's a mental model people have about something that touches on the idea of what people call like rationality, people being rational or irrational and so forth. That is fundamentally blocks people, and it gets people asking the wrong type of question and making the wrong kind of diagnoses and so forth. Kind of reminds me of the waveform idea, where it gets people, if people don't realize it, they ask the wrong questions and they start to diagnose things wrong in the sense of blaming themselves or other people if friendships don't work. Oh, what's wrong with me? People don't call me back, or what's wrong with them? They're just stuck up. They're not friendly, right? In parallel, people are always thinking, oh, people are irrational, or they're rational, or why can't they be rational? Why do they act against their own self-interest? There is a separate way of looking at it that can be helpful. And once again, it relates to the idea of frames. And another part of it is part of the mistake that people make in their default model about how people should rational, or how people think that they're going to act the same as the day before, or that they're going to remember a part of your sales pitch that you gave them yesterday or a week ago, or they're going to feel the same way tomorrow as today about buying and so forth, or will feel like there's something wrong with them if they change their mind, that sort of thing. What we want is a mental model that kind of accurately allows us to predict and proactively deal with this constructively and so forth. The mistake, or part of the mistake, is, if you think about it, it's implicitly assuming that all of someone's brain is active always. Meaning, and what I mean is, will be like, you knew that, or I knew that, darn it, I know not to do that. Why did I do it? But as soon as you say something like that, right, or there's a situation where you're like, darn it, I said I wasn't going to do that again and I did. What does that mean? It implies that when you say you're going to do something, or if you know something and you forget, or you forget to act on it, or you don't feel like acting on it, if you think that you should have just because you knew it, it means logically that you're assuming that part of your brain when you knew it is lit up, which means you're assuming that it's always lit up, which means that you're basically assuming that all of your brain is always lit up, right? That everything you know is currently being taken into account. Because when people don't take into account stuff that they know, then that's irrational to a certain degree. But they don't take into account or they're not acting the same as they were yesterday, right? But if our mental representation of the brain is that only a little bit of it is lit up, right? Like however someone's brain is configured is currently hardwired. It can change, but it's the way it is now, right? Like a wax mold. It's not, of course, made of wax, but a wax mold could be melted and switched around, or even metal wires could be soldered and unplugged and changed. But if you have a device with a bunch of electrical wires, then it's currently hardwired a certain way, right? Unless you change. But it not only is it wired a certain way, but then with your brain, there's the wires, but then in addition to that, there's what's lit up, what's electrically stimulated. And the brain only takes into account what's actually stimulated right now. Because literally it works with electrical impulses being augmented or interfering. Right? You can have inhibition impulses that kind of inhibit something, or you can have them augment something. And that's the fundamental basis for the physical part of your brain is these impulses, right? These neurotransmitters, they transmit between neurosynapses, but what they end up doing in practice is making a new electrical impulse fire. But the old electrical impulse can continue to carry through if there's enough of it as well, which augments. But then also the impulse will stimulate another part, which will stimulate another thing, and it'll stimulate. But what used to be stimulated stops being stimulated to a certain degree. But then there's overall control stations or frames or nodes that'll stay lit up for a while, right? During a particular emotion or thought train or topic that you're thinking about. But then there's all kinds of other parts of the brain that are not lit up. And then the part that stays lit up for 5 minutes might stop being lit up when you start thinking about something else or feeling a different way. Right. So parts can stay lit up for some amount of time, minutes or whatever. Then there's also things that can be just lit up for a split second. And when something stays lit up, it's because it keeps firing over and over anyway. Right. Any electrical impulse in your brain kind of finishes, but then it can keep on firing off and functionally stay lit up. Or there's lots of parts that aren't, right? If we stick you in an MRI and have you think about different things, or if we show you different pictures, or give you different types of experiences or whatever, have someone jump out at you or show you a long lost person in your life you haven't seen, whatever, you can see different things light up, right? Depending on emotions, experiences, triggers, and so forth. I took some time talking about that, filling it in so you see the vision of it. Because once you see things that way, then, hey, wait a second, it's obvious that just because someone was thinking something 5 minutes ago or yesterday, or they're in a particular mood, or something feels important, right? They could basically be in the same mood, basically have the same ideas, basically be thinking about the same topic, but still some things might not be lit up. They might not be immersed and focused in a way where the same problem and therefore the solution that you have feels as important as it did yesterday, or as it did 5 minutes ago, or you can make it feel much more important. And it's not about evidence or being convincing. It's about what's lit up in their mind. Did that start to give you a model that leads you to the right conclusions? You can see in a certain way that kind of explains real life differently. Where, yeah, everyone's irrational all the time in the sense that we're all not taking into account a lot of our knowledge all the time. And sometimes particularly relevant knowledge isn't taken into account. Sometimes it is, depending on how integrated a particular ideas and topic are. Sometimes we'll always think of one thing when we think of something else, right? Or if we're thinking about swimming, we'll always think about what we're wearing. Just come up with random stuff. But I'm just saying, for some people, you might, or going to a party, they'll immediately think about what they're wearing. They walk into a party and they'll notice what other people are wearing, right? So some things constantly go together for somebody. If one thing's lit up, the other thing's lit up. For other people, sometimes they're thinking of something with a particular topic, sometimes they're not. With a business person, a local business person, sometimes they feel like they want traffic, other times they don't. Sometimes they feel wealthy and like they have extra money, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they feel like they have an advertising budget, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the problem of not having leads feels important, sometimes it feels less important. With some business people, it might always feel important. With others, it might not always feel important. It might sometimes feel important. With others, it might never feel important or never feel worth spending money on. The decision part of your business looks easy to the person where it's always lit up, where it always feels important if you have the contact, the lead. being ranked on Google always feels important. Some of your contacts will be like, then the decision thing is easy, right? Some people always get on my webinar, so it doesn't matter what I put on my post. With other people, it's more of it's sometimes they feel like getting on, sometimes they don't. And then it can matter what I say in my post, right, about the webinar. So it's, of course, the people like that are, you might call them on the fence or in the middle, but really what it is, sometimes they'll feel something related to that'll relate to a decision for buying your product, and sometimes they won't. It's where with those people that it's particularly important. That's where the confidence with leading people to decisions, right, in sales affects your bottom line. Generally, there's going to be people on both the two extremes where they'll buy if you have the relationship and the fulfillment. The decision part is for some segment of your audience, right? For although there might be no segment where if at least hit one category, like competent or reliability or whatever it might be, then it's the case that as long as you tick off that category for the person, tick in a good way, check off that category, then that's it. That's all you need for the decision. But for other people, there's stuff that the light's kind of going on and off, right, with what they need to make a decision. And so you're not trying to, once you figure it out, you're not trying to sell to people where it's never going to go on. But you don't know if it'll go on if you don't know how to turn it on, the light, right? How to stimulate what needs to be stimulated in their mind in order for them to buy. If you are competent and have this idea that I am showing with you of creating the vision, the justification, and the thingness, then you'll generally get the people in the middle. And because you can do that, you'll also relatively quickly recognize people that won't buy. It's a vicious cycle in a negative way. If you don't know how to make a sale, right? If you don't know this idea I'm sharing with you about the decision process, you don't have the right model, then you also can't spot if there's no sale to be made. But if you have this mental model of things lighting up in certain ways, and then I'm going to continue on and explain about the framing, vision, justification, and thingness. With that, it's going to give you an overall framework where it's going to make making a sale to somebody who you tick off enough categories that it's reasonable, but they're still going to be iffy, depending on whether you can do this with them or not. And then you'll be able to do it again. And again, you'll also invest less time with people that are not going to be able to buy. And you'll essentially just have a system where people that you could make reasonably get them to buy. And of course, that means they're going to be happy with your fulfillment, right? I'm not talking about getting people to buy who won't be happy with your fulfillment, but you'll be able to get them to buy. And how nice is that? Isn't that a great thing? People have this part of the block that people have. It's similar to that thing about getting someone to like you that doesn't actually like you. Part of the block people have is that, oh, you can sell ice to Eskimos or whatever, right? Or I want the idea that what a salesman does or what a good salesman does is they could sell anything to anybody. And to me, really the height of competence with sales is when you can get people that if you light up the right places in their mind that are already there, right? But you get them lit up while not having the things that are going to interfere lit up. And you understand generally how that works, including the details of how it works for your particular audience and product. Then you're gold. And that's what you want to shoot for, right? And if you're quite good at that, then that can be your semi-soft lock either, right? But your semi-soft lock, you're not going for a hard lock with sales where you can sell anything to anybody, right? You want to get to where you understand how it works. First you have the model I just gave you, and then you have the further stuff I'm about to explain. And that's that. And didn't that seem doable to you? Either competence or particular excellence with that. Okay. So now here's what happens. When you create a vision, what you're doing is it has to do with frames. You say you can think of what's lit up in someone's brain currently as it determines how they interpret outside stimuli. Think about it, right? A person's going to react to, for example, your offer to do SEO for them differently based on, of course, their frame. Now, there's two aspects to their frame. There's what's hard-coded and there's what's lit up right now. To change what's hard-coded takes time, which might be worth doing if you it's part of your funnel process will be sharing frames with them, like pointing out to them like someone might never have been exposed to the return on investment that various people in their industry have gotten from ranking on that could expand and even change their frame. So if you're able to meet with someone and under the idea that you're showing them trends in the industry or opening their eyes to how things can work with Google, return on investment and so forth, whatever the pretext is in a good way. I don't mean that in a negative sense, pretext. And then of course you can have your diagnostic questions. Diagnostic questions can get someone to change their associations, their wiring a little bit in their brain, right? So you can do it and then come back, meet with them a second time, and they can have a different mental framework a little bit, hardwired to some degree. So that's part of it. And then the other part is what's lit up at the time. Vision can do both. It can make it appealing. The reason someone would switch their wiring is if a new frame looks more appealing. It's more what they want. So the idea that there's a return on investment that can be really nice with ranking on Google is a potentially appealing thing that can get them to change their wiring, right there, what they think about. It's not just that you're lighting up different parts of what exists, but you're changing their ideas of what can be good for them in business. If you're going to get someone to change their wiring, and once you have this mental model, it flows to notice what's different in the wiring, and then give people a day to let that sink in. If we let people know when they didn't previously that we have a $5,000 program, it's good to give them a day in a lot of cases, depending on, again, some people are wired for that. They just need to have the right things lit up in their mind. So they already have a category of what they would pay 5,000. For other people, taking a day on it when it's something, it's a very appealing idea. Wow, actually, I could really focus in this year. I can do something new. I can get immersed in something. I see how I could do some training that can really show me a system that makes sense to me. And I see why that would be more like doing a college course. There would be more level of paying 5,000 or doing a formal coaching. Something might have to sink in for some people. For other people, again, it doesn't need to. They're already okay with that. And then it's a matter of lighting the right things up. What a vision does is it operates and gives people a frame in addition to giving them like content and detail. The kind of somewhat famous statement about you want to sell the sizzle, not the steak. There's ways to interpret that right and ways to interpret it wrong, right? And what it means on the surface is that if you're getting someone to come to your restaurant where you have steak, you don't just want to say we have steak. You want to show the steak sizzling on the grill, and that might spark something for them that's more likely for them to come to your restaurant. But what the real meta idea that works, if you do it, is when you give a vision, you're giving them the frame. Like you don't just sell the steak. Another way to put it is you don't just sell the steak. You create a frame in which steak is desirable and you insert the steak, right? A vision also is giving them enough to immerse them, right? By talking and sharing something that's both appealing and scenario based, it captures a person's attention. You don't need a story to do this. If you're good with stories, which I tend to not be currently, at least in many cases, like if there's one at hand that particularly is good, then maybe I can relate it, maybe I can't. But it's not like something that just falls off the page for me all the time. And therefore I don't have a lot of practice with it and so on and so forth. When people say stories sell, that's correct, but it's a subsection of what sells. What sells is a vision because you are taking something appealing, but you're also giving the scenario in which it's appealing, and you're presenting it all. You want to have enough sensitivity to your audience that you're presenting the frame and the thing within something that that kind of fits in with their existing, right? They're coming to you with frames too. But part of what the vision does is light up their existing frames that are relevant. So you're getting the relevant parts of their mind, right? People come to you and they're relative to what you want them to be focused on. They're probably scattered, right? They're probably not like focused like a laser on what you want them to be. They're probably thinking about it a bit, but whenever you're communicating with them, there's probably other things that are like their focus isn't channeled. You know how a movie can draw you in, of course, right? To the point where something can really shock you, or a book, or just Facebook on your iPhone or whatever, right? Where someone can sneak up on you and accidentally surprise you. I don't even mean they're trying to surprise you, right? but you get drawn in. What that shows, of course, is that people can get focused in where what they're doing seems important. We want to be, and this is where the overall idea of frames becomes very interesting. When we think about frames, we think about focus, and for me, I think about the meta idea of focus is at the front of my mind nearly all the time. So if I want to get immersed in something, I do things to get myself immersed, to make something more fun, or to help find a solution, or to not get distracted by something else, and to help influence other people to get immersed, right? So if you want to do a business project and accomplish it well and quickly, then if I'm really immersed, then it'll naturally lead other people to be more immersed. Plus, my mind will subconsciously be working on it more, right? However, when some potential drawback to immersion is that what you're immersed in feels more important than it would feel otherwise, which can be a problem if there's a problem, right? It might not be a problem if there's a problem. It might lead you to put appropriate or a lot of resource into a problem that really you want to solve. But it's when people often just get pissed off or do what seems like overreacting or make a mountain out of a molehill, right? So you want to watch it for the negative. If you find yourself getting too reacting to trivial things, then of course you need to get what people call perspective, which means you want to get out of your overly narrow focus. But it's a tool to use, but it's also when you're selling. Do you want the problem that you're selling the solution to feel more important to your prospect or less important? Obviously more important. How do you do that? Draw them in. How do you draw them in? If they're more focused. How does someone get more focused? As you elaborate on a particular vision, naturally the way the mind works, they tend to get drawn in, right? If you're listing off details or if you're building a case, if you're presenting evidence and justifications, that doesn't tend to draw people in, right? So that's why you want to keep justifications minimal and later. It's a second step. You don't lead with justifications, but it's a very easy mistake to make. So I've talked about in the past, right? Because for you, when you're selling something or when you're just doing a business, right? So you're an entrepreneur, you're excited about your product, you're excited about making money, you're excited about making a sale, whatever it might be. Let's say you're just naturally really hyper immersed in your business and what you're doing. Then you want to, once again, by thinking about focus, you can harness that properly, but not improperly. One of the improper things besides negative emotion is assuming your prospect is as immersed as you are. The good thing is if you're immersed, then you will naturally, there's an aspect that will lead your prospect to become more immersed naturally. So that's good, right? If you're excited about something, that'll influence the person that you're with, if you're in rapport, to get excited. On the other hand, if you're excited about something and the other person's not excited, that'll lead to breaking rapport in the first place. So you need to be a little bit gradual. Good thing about a vision is it naturally bridges your excitement and immersion with theirs without taking it for granted, right? So you want to harness your hyperfocus, but not break rapport with it or cause it to blind you to the fact that they're not hyperfocused yet. And again, you bridge that with talking about vision. And so what do I mean by vision? I think with this introduction, you can almost figure it out for yourself, but you're taking something that's appealing to the other person right now. And then you are looking around, going ahead in time, going backwards in time, what led to it, right? And it's something that feels interesting or important to them right now, either because it's a problem or it's a fad that they're interested in, whatever. They're interested in it. It's an advantage they want, whatever. But for whatever reason, you start with a kernel, a seed that they're interested in. And in a vision, you grow that seed. But the way to do it is you take a look at what led to it, or where is it going, or what's related to it and it's just something you poke around with and develop for yourself. And including you develop a framework for your vision that you tailor, right? Your vision factory for your particular product that you have. And I'm using product, of course, I'm not misspeaking. I'm just referring to the whole genre of fulfillment, product, service, results when I say product later. So you'll develop a framework where the vision flows from you, but it's tailored to your audience. It could be a group, could be an individual, right? But just if you're telling a story, but if you have a good framework for the story, then you can tailor it to your audience, right? Same thing with a vision. So you get a sense of different starting points of what you have to offer, different or different connecting points, relevant aspects or things that lead to your solution. Right? If you're selling digital agency services, then there's all kinds of little they could be interested in Facebook. They could be interested in expanding their business. They could be interested in just marketing in general. They could be interested in talking about business. They could be interested in how the economy is doing well or how the economy is not doing well, right? So you can develop a number of these things as ins that you're sensitive to, that you can take those and you build it to a vision. Yeah, the economy is growing right now. People are excited. Yeah, he's like, yeah, I have a vision for, or you may not use the words, I have a vision, but you could say, yeah, like people are going their business right now. If the other person has that seed that they vibe with, right? And you might even say, I'm growing my business by getting leads. I'm finding that Facebook works well for the first couple of months. And then we maintain it a little bit, but I don't look to have that be my only thing. And I'm really finding a lot of growth with what I'm doing with Google, maybe even with Twitter, right? But, and then say, yeah, I really find that what businesses really get into is we find one way to get them leads now. We find one way to get that we invest in that's going to lead to a good long-term source of leads. So nice, you get a pop now, you get a pop late, and you get an ongoing stream later that you can count on, because it tends to be where things that give you a pop now tend not to last. In a lot of cases, and things that will give you a steady stream, they tend to be things you have to invest in building them up for a little while first. They go really well together. Isn't that a nice package? And you go from it. But you see how that's like a vision, right? There's that kind of sparked a little bit of visual, a little bit of moving forward in time, right? Building, right? A vision starts with something, grows, and it can go a little sideways about what's going on. Sideways is we have Facebook and we have Google, right? Forward in time is the first couple of months, we get a lot out of Facebook. But then those leads tend to dry up because we've already hit those people, right? That Facebook is determined are our audience. And so or they might have seen the ads. But that's when Google we start to see movement there, and it's exciting. We get to see that grow. So first we'll be on the second page, then we'll see it go on the first page. The phone calls will start to come in. Once again, what I just said to you there, I'm interrupting this, right? Up until the phone calls start to come in. Vision, right? Naturally speaking, in vision, you always, when you're doing sales and decision, that's where your foundation is. That's where, again, that builds your whole frame. And then other things fit into that, including the justification. Once they like that, right? Once they buy into the vision, you wait until that. There's no point in justification until they buy into the vision, until they want it. And I just said want it. They need to want an it. It's much easier to want something that's like a thing. I'll give you the example, which sells bagels. Basically, it's a restaurant. And there's Chesapeake Bagel Bakery in my old town of Charlottesville, Virginia. One of the Bodo's did wildly more business. And there's a way that they turned going to Bodo's into a thing. Like you would actually say, let's go to Bodo's. And it's a restaurant, it's fun. They have like their own music track that the guy put together himself. And not that it's anything like special, even music you like, but it's its own thing. And then, I don't know, there's a big bagel for a handle on the door, and the menus are pretty good. They have a lot of different choices, and you get a feeling like there's nice fresh ingredients and so forth. But they don't go crazy on, we're all organic. I mean, they're just simple, clear, fun, friendly. But somehow it's a thing, like going to Bodo's. And if you wouldn't really say, let's go to Chesapeake Bagel Bakery, you'd say, oh, I want to get a bagel, there's a place. So it's one thing they make going to Bodo's into a thing. And with Chesapeake Bagel Bakery, it's not like it's a thing. It's more, okay, I want a bagel as a thing, right? If you want a bagel and it's right there, you'll go there, right? The thing you want is a bagel. But Bodo's will get people that want like the experience of just going out somewhere easy, nice, tasty, cheap, fun, right? Either with a family or a friend or yourself. And so you have to want a bagel in order to want to go to Chesapeake. To want to go to Bodo's, you just have to want a nice, fun, cheap eating experience, which a lot of us want. That's also easy to bring a group or a family or whatever. You see the difference? And not that you see every difference, not that the idea makes perfect sense yet, but there's a start to see the distinction. So the question is, if you don't want your product to only appeal to, you don't want your audience, your prospect, to have to make what you have into a thing, because that's going to greatly narrow down who's going to buy from you into only the subsection of your prospects that their brain makes what you have into a thing, right? So again, you don't want your prospects, metaphorically, to only be people that want a bagel, because there's a lot more people that want fun, quick, reasonably healthy, not that healthy, but doesn't feel to people like a Big Mac, whether or not it's any different, right? A lot more people that want that than a bagel already, right? So you need to do that with your product or service, or if you're doing affiliate promotion, whatever you're selling. If you're selling to someone who already thinks they want that exact thing, then again, that's narrow. Instead, you want to create, what you do is you create more context around the bagel. By having more context, it fits into more categories, right? Like it's more of a thing. It's built up with, it's not even just packaging at all. It's like Bodo's, the bagel place doesn't just look different. It is different, right? So packaging can be part of it, but between the packaging, between referring to it somehow in a few different ways, or people hearing it from a few different people somehow, suppose that there's a business person who would be a good prospect for digital services. And they're generally in your circles where it's realistic that they would hear about you from more than one person. Of course, if they totally had no connection to you and didn't go to the same networking group or whatever, that's all right. But suppose they're in a group and then they hear independently referrals from you about you from 2 or 3 people. By the time they hear from 2 or 3 people, especially 3, you and your agency become a thing to them in a different way. Because now you're not just your product that they have to independently want ahead of time. Instead, you are like something they should check out, or you're like, somehow you take on a different level of like reality and thingness, like I'm talking about, that I can only point to these examples right now. But I pay attention to this always when I'm selling something. I try to have a way to make it into something that people become interested in rather than that, and that they can want without having already wanted that exact thing first, the way I've been trying to explain that. So you want them to want it, right, before you justify, I was saying. So the more kind of expansive the it is in both, and most of the expansiveness comes from the framing effects, not, and more referrals or things pointing to it, or ways that you mention it. If you have an ongoing relationship with a potential prospect, if you somehow can describe your service with different anecdotes in different ways and different times and different days, then again, it becomes more of a thing to them that can fit into their business in different ways. Yeah, we help people get more leads. Or, yeah, we help people who are just looking to expand. And by hooking into us, we help them expand. So either it's more of a thing, or if it's a thing with different aspects that can fit into different types of things that they want. Like maybe you expand to be more of something that they want, or you have different aspects you fit in to where they are in different ways. But there's a certain way that, so when something's tangible, right? If something's somehow vague or intangible, it's harder to want it than if it's once somehow is tangible. But for something to be tangible, it has to, again, fit in. I know I repeat this word a lot, but fit in with their frame of reality. Like what the same thing can be intangible to one person and tangible to another, depending on whether we've had experience with it, right? Like simply saying, I do SEO. To some people that might be tangible, and other people it might be intangible. So finding different ways to frame it to where it can make sense. People like, make sense is a word that kind of means tangibility, right? It feels like you can interact with it with your senses. So think about thingness, because the vision provides the frame that draws them into more focus in a particular area, right? The area in which your problem that your solution, or the thing that they're doing, that their task that you have the advantage to, feels very important, right? There still needs to be a thing in there inside of that vision that they have to want, right? So the vision makes the thing important, but there has to be a thing there. And then once they want that thing inside of this vision, and the vision doesn't have to be all, you can draw it out of them partly too. Of course, the more they feel like they think of it, the better. But you're co-creating or co-elucidating, drawing out from the person. I'm thinking of the Latin, educo is draw out, it's where education comes from. But you're drawing out of both you and them, this vision, you're creating it together as much as it can be together. Of course, you're leading in some sense. You're the one trying to lead into the decision, right? Presumably. So you're taking responsibility in a certain way. And then once they want it, then you justify, and you keep the justification short and sweet, and then you stack or you cycle back around if they need more justification. But you start with one justification and then see if they're going to buy, so, somewhat subtly or directly. Yeah, you can use the way and the art of closing if you want. But what do you think? How do you feel about that? Do you want to move forward, or does that sound good for me? Things like that. Or I'd love to have you on board with this. Is there any other questions you have? I don't know. Some other salesmen might object to. It depends on your niche, your industry, the person you're talking to, and so forth. Anyhow, justification, you want to stand alone in some way, right? Doesn't to stand out. If you're standing out, that means they're looking at other stuff. One of the ways to stand alone is the vision kind of gets them narrowly focused with you and so forth, right? But then, of course, having your testimonials, having your reason. Oh, like what I talked about with the thing. I mentioned this last time, I think, when I was talking about sales a couple of webinars ago. Like with OMG, the 90-day system makes it more of a thing. And the research and demonstration that we do makes it more of it's like a justification of what we do, why we're worth the price, right? And how you combine your service and your product also helps your justification. Okay, so that is good with that. And we've been going for 2 hours, but I still want to give a fast shout out to Meta idea that's pretty simple, actually. And it's going to relate to everything we talked about in a sense. And maybe next time I can talk a little bit more about this and do some Q&A and then get into the next topics that we'll cover, like accelerated learning after that. All right, I'll read what's on this slide. Without functionally complete understanding, you don't have to really understand this first line yet. It's just going to matter later. Or it's mainly the second line for it. That's going to be tangible. And then we'll come back to the first. But anyway, without functionally complete understanding, do not get negatively attached to both a narrow goal, like a result, and the route to it. By default, people do this all the time. So for example, if you already have a kind of path or process laid out, like your business plan, or like you're about to do a sales presentation, right? Your route is already pretty narrow at that point. Then you don't want to be attached to the result, like an expectation for what you're going to result if your route is already pretty narrow. Unless I say without functionally complete understanding. If you totally know what's going on, if you the functionally complete understanding means that what you do understand overlaps with how things are going to actually turn out. If you're driving to Starbucks, is my kind of go-to illustration for functionally complete understanding, right? You know the route to go there. That when you get there, it's going to be open and you're going to be able to buy coffee and it all works, right? That all is fine. If the store was closed or something, then you didn't have functionally complete understanding regarding that situation. And you can rewrite your thinking real quick when you realize that there's new information. Anyhow, this webinar has kind of gone on a bit long, so I'm not going to do this particular justice, but I at least want to expose you to it. This has application after application. If there's a particular person that you want a relationship with or want to make a sale to, and so if your goal or result is narrow, then you need to have your route, your process, your timeline, your path, timeline important, right? This is going to explain, it's going to be like a Sixth Sense, the movie where at the end, it's like you realize something and it reframes a whole bunch of things you've already seen. You're like, aha. So this idea that I'm sharing you right now can do that with a lot of things that are true or that I've shared with you or talked about. But this is why if you need to accomplish something fast, then you're being narrow regarding the route. That means your result itself is going to be less reliable and it's going to be less easy, right? Because easy means the other parts of the path are going to be a lot harder. And reliable means you might not get the result at all because you're being narrow about part of the route, which is the timeline, right? So if you really want to achieve a goal, if we stipulate that, get a certain result, then you need to start operating on the idea that you need to open up your route, which includes your process, the path that you travel, and your timeline as much as you can. Here's the thing. With a lot of success philosophy, people end up saying stuff that amounts to thinking that you can be narrow with both your route and your goal, but you just got to persevere and be positive, thinking and determined and have enough willpower. Instead, what I do is I focus on frameworks, right? Things like that. And so you can't just declare with like positive thinking and whatever else people call it. You can't just speak into existence that the route is going to work or that your route is going to be wide. You can't just say, all right, I'll do whatever it takes. Because the problem is you don't have the framework to do whatever it takes. You won't even realize all sorts of things that it might take that never occur to you. Right. And so what this previous slide was doing is we're presuming that your goal, the result you want to get in business, is fairly narrow. Like you want to make a certain amount of money. Right. Because of that, when you realize what I just shared with you on this new slide, we need to operate in a meta way, in a framework-based way, to expand our route, our process, our timeline, our paths that occur to us, not just our process, like expanding what we're willing to do, but expand what we realize to do. You might be willing to make a product and never think of it. So you need a framework that helps you to think of more product ideas and notice them too. You say, so you can't just declare, yeah, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll take as long as it takes. My route is wide open. I'll take whatever path. You need to build a framework that's gonna lead to you naturally having much more open paths and even your timeline. Part of what I say sometimes, I don't make a big deal out of it, but this is a good time to point out why I say it, is if you spend less money, then you open up your timeline in life. Because when it comes to making money, of course you'll, and it doesn't mean you invest less. You have more money to invest if you spend less money wherever you realistically can. Right? So you open up your timeline realistically regarding money if you spend less of it, which makes it you're more able to achieve your result. Think about it, right? This is the basic dimensionality idea. Says the same thing, right? What's dimensionality? If I want to reliably and effectively achieve a result, I want to have success, I want to win, then logically, the more open I am to getting there in various ways, and ways means all kinds of things, right? Including timeline and everything, then that's what I need to do in order to achieve a result. You don't just need to be more determined and more persistent. Persistence is great, right? But you need to overall, in a multidimensional way, expand your route or your path. And you do that in a meta way, by expanding your framework for paths that you can take. Not just by trying to skip thinking you should have the framework for doing whatever it takes and just declaring you're going to do whatever it takes. If you declare you're going to do whatever it takes without a framework for being able to do whatever it takes, including realize what it takes and questioning assumptions that you wouldn't even realize to question. You can say, I question assumptions, but that doesn't help you to question assumptions unless you have a framework that points those assumptions out to you. Lots of people have bumper stickers say question authority or question assumptions, but they have all sorts of bad assumptions they never realize. Right? So again, you can't declare it. If you declare that you question assumptions, you're assuming you already have the framework for doing that. Instead, instead of declaring something, you work on the framework. You declare, I'm not going to say I should already have the framework. I might not have the framework for doing whatever it takes. What I'm going to declare is that I'm going to work on a framework for whatever it takes, which means I won't have the block of thinking I already should have. So this is going to turn out to be quite a profound idea. It's basically another angle on our central law of implication and dimensionality ideas, but I think it's a terrific illustration in bridging and explaining of it, and a terrific angle in practice that will cause us to realize all sorts of things we didn't realize, and also realize the importance of certain things that I've said in the past. So we need to accept, all right, furthermore, both, and I mean by both a goal that you have and the route to it, both inherently start out narrow by default, and you need to embrace that, not deny it. You need to accept that. You cannot just declare that they're not narrow. Okay, of course, I already talked about this when I said you can't just declare, I'm going to do whatever it takes. Of course, nothing wrong with saying it, but when you say you're going to do whatever it takes, the way you accomplish anything is you build the framework, the factory for it. And then you get the produce of it, which is the expanded route, the wide path, right? The fat path. You need to expand the framework underneath them, right? This is what I wrote, and that's what I said. And then I said, again, we encounter again how understanding frames, right? So frameworks here and frames is the key to success, right? Because the framework allows the expanded route or the expanded potential goals that you have. You can expand what is going to get you over the threshold. And that's what's good about when I talk about the fat target or the threshold. A threshold gets the line right when you think of a threshold because you're trying to get over a certain boundary. but everything over that boundary is fair game. So it gets you to reveal where's the real thing I have to get over with making money or whatever. And then anything after that, I'm flexible. Just need to get over this boundary. But I do need to get over that threshold. So once I identify that I do need to hit that result, at least of getting over that threshold of money or whatever, then I want the route to be as fat in a good way as possible. Right. So this sheds more light on the fat path idea and on lots of other things I said in the past. So I wanted to share that with you as well. All right. Once again, gone on pretty long here, but I'm very happy with how this went. Meaning, I don't know. Again, I had the slide, but I don't know what's going to come out of my brain exactly. So I'm happy with how it went. I'll look at a little bit of discussion, but then particularly we'll devote next time to discussion. So hold some of your stuff. Come out next time. I'd like to have a little discussion next time and not have it be dead. The whole brain is not lit up all the time. Love it. Yeah, isn't that amazing? It's so simple when you think about it. We already knew it, but when we see how we violate it with our assumptions by accident, right? We say things that imply the opposite. Man, she felt that way one day and not the other. The OMG students behave like this. That's great, Jim. Suleiman. So when you think in scenarios, all the relevant areas are lit up. As you delve into a scenario, so scenarios are also really kind of triangulated, sensory based. I know I've never given like a perfect definition of it. Maybe I'll try to think of that for next time too. Talk more about scenarios and even to understand vision even more. But I gave enough examples that a vision, it's more like a different, like everything starts out as a difference. People want to know what it is. But what you first spot is not what something is. If there's a difference between two things or states. And so the difference between a vision and not a vision is with a vision that you're not somehow being immersive. You're not giving someone a frame that works for them. The frame has to fit in with where they're at. But then it starts with where they're at. And like they buy into looking at your frame. And then your frame is like enough of a movie, enough of an interesting thing in and of itself, right? That it captures the attention, which then inherently makes everything feel close and important to what you're talking about. And then it provides this nice result. Oh, a vision provides a nice endpoint, right? Like it's like this frame that leads to this nice thing, right? A vision for a relationship, you're talking about how it might be and it's appealing, right? It's nice. And it's so the key to making sales. Absolutely. Right. Especially with the other context I've given you with the waveforms, fitting in with the waveforms and so forth, and realizing where the place of a vision is where there's a potential waveform between how they'd be willing to like look at things differently, a little bit wiring things differently, and then what you light up in their brain. But the potential has to be there. And then the vision fits right in there. That has to provide something appealing and light up what's relevant to you making the sale. Target acquired, mind lit up. Yeah, beautiful. Wayne says, now this brings to light, so to speak, how important context is often more important than content. That's right. Exactly, Wayne. And and you can think of them as they all fit together as a whole, the content, the context, and so forth, but they give meaning to each other and so forth. And often what's content for one thing is context for another. Mr. Client, which part of your brain is lit up at this? Kyle says, maybe a bit off topic. Do you think that general artificial intelligence, what limitations do you see? Yeah, it's a somewhat interesting question. I don't, for example, at all fear that machines will take over the no Terminator scenario. I don't. Anyone that thinks that way, I think they fundamentally misunderstand intelligence and consciousness and so forth. My overall understanding of mind and consciousness and frames and such, there's a certain way that you can't get out of certain frames without consciousness. And so an artificial intelligence will be locked into frames that are programmed into it, which is a tremendous difference, massive difference. There's a way that no one gets scared, even the dogs, right, will take over the world, or fish, right, or monkeys, and even less so with machines, no matter how we program them. I love Boda, says John Victoria. That's great. Where do you live? Do you live in Charlottesville, John? Or are they outside of Charlottesville at this point? I don't think they are. Okay, I will end this webinar, but we'll talk next. Bring your enthusiasm and everything to next webinar. It says the explanation about the brain lighting up really helps to explain issues that people have with diet as well. It also helps you not feel bad about not making a sale if that part of the brain is not lit up. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad. It can lead. There's something where when you have the right model, right, for things, that people don't often explicitly say, I want the right mental model for this or the right representation of that. But it's amazing when you just have the right representation, so much flows from it. When you have the wrong one, then so many kind of wrong assumptions and wrong conclusions flow as well. So you're very welcome, Chet. Said thank you, David, for the weather. Frames, said Michael, exactly. Yeah, I think I just want to do like a whole series where I talk about all the different applications and ways they understand frames and how it applies to so much. I live in Northern Virginia. No, that's Nova. I thought Nova was a city when I first went to Charlottesville because I was from New York. People say I'm from Nova, but it's an acronym for Northern Virginia. But I visited UVA Charlottesville area a lot. I would always recommend it to go. Oh, fun. Excellent. Great job. Suleiman, you're very welcome. Very welcome, Marine. Great attendance here. So that's nice. You light up my brain. Love it. Terrific. Quote of the night. You're very welcome, Susanna. Yeah, today was a good blend of kind of review, tying things in, and a new take on some things and new information. Peter said, wow, so thankful I have MAM, which you covered frames and coding very well. It made lots of tonight relight up for me. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That's my information product I sold a while ago as on information product business. As predicted, mind blown. Oh, terrific. I'm so glad. You can open carry your kind of the bridge. Awesome. Thank you. You're very welcome, Maria and Brian. You guys are always so kind to me. Very nice. I mean that seriously. It's just really makes it all so nice. Look forward to hopefully a good webinar next week. It'll either be good or short. Can't lose either way. Take care, guys. Have a great night. Oh, you're welcome, Jennifer. Thank you. Lots of useful insight here. I'm glad. You're very welcome, Zach. Thanks for saying it was a great webinar. Appreciate that. Okay, I'll end things and I'll read any other nice, happy comments. I will appreciate as well. Take care, guys.